Welcome to video 2 about our case study of the Yakama tribes, and this one we're going to focus on the Stevens Treaties. Okay, so as we're going, make sure that you go ahead and take some notes, because some of this information is specific to the Yakama, but a lot of it's generalizable across tribes and groups. So a lot of it's going to hold true for your later research as well, so you might want some of that. All right. So first of all, when we look at the treaties, there's a group of 8 treaties in Washington State. Okay, we're going to focus on that one on the top left, the Yakama Treaty, but there's also a Walla Walla Treaty, an Olympia Treaty, a Point No Point Treaty, one for Point Elliott, one for the Nez Perce, one for Nia Bay, and then the Medicine Creek one. Okay, and the Medicine Creek Treaty, by the way, that's the one that covers the folks that are here in the Federal Way area, right? So if you're one of my many kids that lives in Federal Way, ultimately Medicine Creek's the one you're going to be looking at, which is part of why we're going to use the Yakama as our case study, because then I'm not doing your research for you. Okay. All right. So, guiding principles of the treaties. Make sure, by the way, you'll see that there are 3 that are called out because they're in red print. Make sure you get all of these written down, but in particular those 3 red ones, because those are the ones that are going to appear on the quiz in Canvas related to this series of videos. All right, so here's our guiding principles, the ones that hold true largely across treaties. Okay, tribes would be concentrated together if possible and practical. So they're going to, when they say they're concentrating people, they mean they're moving people in closer together. Okay, so they're taking groups that are spread out and they're giving them a much smaller area of land. Agriculture and other civilized habits, and we put civilized in quotation marks intentionally, were to be encouraged. And that term civilized, reason why it's in quotation marks is it's a loaded term. Okay, in this case, what it means is that they're going to be encouraging Native Americans to act, look, and adopt cultural traits of white Americans. Okay, that's really what that means. Okay, but civilized is one of those things where, the other option is to be uncivilized or be savage, and that's really the attitude that folks are coming to with it, and Isaac Stevens is coming to with it as he's negotiating these treaties, that he's a civilized person, they are not, and we're going to try and encourage them to be more like us. Indian lands were to be purchased with annuities. Okay, and annuities are payment across time. And specifically in this case, the payment is going to be goods rather than cash. So for example, instead of, if I go buy a plot of land today, right, and I pay for it across time, I'm going to pay cash for it every single time these days. Okay, it's incredibly rare to pay anything other than cash when you're buying land. But what the treaties want to do for the Native Americans is they want to say, okay, we'll give you fill in the blank good, I don't know, 20 blankets a year for 60 years, 3 bushels of corn for 20 years. That's what I mean when I say payment of goods. So they're not giving them money, they're giving them trade goods. Okay. Government was to provide teachers, doctors, farmers, blacksmiths, and carpenters to care for and train Native Americans. Okay, so that, by the way, put a pin in these red ones because we're going to come back to them too. But teachers, doctors, farmers, blacksmiths, you'll notice those are craftspeople, right? Carpenters, also a craft person. And so they're helping take care of, so they're building things, they're doing things like building houses and churches and teaching them how to farm and things like that, right? That's the care for, and train. They're also teaching them how to do those things. Okay. In theory, it would have been a little bit like an apprenticeship system. I say in theory because even good apprenticeship systems back in that day and age were not great, and these were not good ones. Okay, folks are not getting taught those skills. Intertribal warfare was to be prohibited. Prohibited means forbidden. Okay, so there it becomes against the law. Inter means between tribal groups. So intertribal is between tribal groups. Okay, so they're not allowed to fight with each other anymore. Indian slaveholding was to be abolished. Abolished means to be gotten rid of. Okay, the liquor trade was to be eliminated. This is alcohol, so they're not only is the government not going to sell alcohol to Native Americans, but they're going to go after other people who do. That's the theory, at least. Doesn't really work out that way, but that's the theory. Native Americans were to be allowed to hunt, fish, and gather other traditional foods until they had been fully civilized. And there's that word again, right? So in this context, and we'll loop back and pick this up in a later video, just understand that civilized really means stripped of their culture. Okay. And then the last one of this, and it's another one we'll pick up a little bit later, though it doesn't affect the Yakama as much, right, is the eventual division of reservation lands into individual allotments that had to be, into individual allotments had to be provided for. So in other words, eventually we're going to take reservation lands, which are held in common for a whole group of Native Americans. They can't dispose of them unless they can agree to do so as a group. Into individual allotments, that is property ownership like you and I know today. So we're going to give each individual person some property, and they're going to be able to do with that what they wish. Okay, so we're going to come back to that idea. Again, those three red ones, I'm going to ask you to put in your own words, and those are going to appear in the quiz and Canvas to make sure you watched the video and picked up key point. All right, so this is the first little bit of the Yakama Treaty. Okay, and I'm going to read it to you, and as I do, I want you to listen to it and see if you can figure out who's giving what up. Okay, so it's June 9th, 1855. Says, Articles of Agreement and Convention made and concluded at the Treaty Ground, Camp Stevens, Walla Walla Valley, this 9th day of June in the year 1855, by and between Isaac I. Stevens, Governor and Superintendent of Indian Affairs for the Territory of Washington, on the part of the United States, and the undersigned head chiefs, headmen, and delegates of the Yakama, Palouse, Piskus, Wenatchipum, Klickitat, Tlingit, Kawasai, Liiwas, Skinpa, Wisham, Shiks, Ochichots, Kamitpa, and Siapkat, confederated tribes and bands of Indians, occupying lands hereinafter bounded and described and lying in Washington Territory, who, for purposes of this treaty, are to be considered as one nation, under the name of Yakama, with Kamayakan as its head chief, on behalf of and acting for said tribes and bands, and being duly authorized thereto by them. So pause here for just a sec, and let me just say I hope I pronounced all those tribal names right, but I recognize I probably didn't. If you happen to be from one of those groups, or if you happen to know how to pronounce one of those names, let me apologize if I got the pronunciation wrong. Okay, so we've got this whole list of various tribal groups, and we're going to treat them all as one group. Okay, so we're not going to negotiate individually with each band of people, but we're going to treat them as one group, and we're going to put Kamayakan kind of in charge of negotiating for that group. Okay, And oftentimes, not always, the chief that they would negotiate with was somebody who was speaking for the whole group. Sometimes they're not doing that, right? Sometimes federal government negotiators are operating in bad faith and they just find whomever will agree with them, decide that that person's a chief, and negotiate the treaty. Kamayakin's a very famous guy. So I happen to know that he was speaking on behalf of people, right? He wasn't just a random person chosen, but he's actually a fairly powerful chief. All right, so we've got Isaac Stevens negotiating with Kamayakin in the Walla Walla Valley, right? And Kamayakin's representing all those different tribal groups. Now we're going to read the first part of the first paragraph. Okay. Article 1. The aforesaid confederated tribes and bands of Indians hereby cede, relinquish, and convey to the United States all their right, title, and interest in and to the lands and country occupied and claimed by them, and bounded and described as follows, to wit, and then it's got a description, okay, which I didn't bother to put in here, but just know that it's a description of the territory. Okay, so that little bit down there, so the aforesaid confederated tribes and bands, that's the ones listed above, hereby cede, relinquish, and convey. Those are some big words, by which I mean they're fancy words that we don't use every day. To cede means to give up the rights to, right? To relinquish means to give up control of, and convey means to actually pass over to someone else. Okay, so they're giving up all rights to this land. Both literally they're going to leave the land, and that they are giving up any right to say that they control or they own the land. So they're going to do all of that to the United States, all their right, title, and interest in and to the lands and country occupied. Okay, so that just says kind of what I was telling you. So occupied and claimed by them. Okay, so we know already that what they're doing is they're giving up. And remember that video from the last movie I made for you, right? Where we watched the treaty lands, and then we looked at the size of the Yakama reservation, right? We know that they're giving up a whole lot of land and getting not very much land in return. So remember, they're getting condensed down, put into a much smaller piece. So I'm going to stop there, and then we're going to pick it up in part 3 of our video series. And in part 3, we're going to look at the aftermath of those treaty negotiations and what happens to Native American communities in general, and talk a little more about the Yakama in particular. And we'll end part 4 will be our, I'll go over directions for the research and so forth for this week. All right, with that all being said, go ahead, jump over to Canvas, answer the video to question, and I'll see you in a few minutes.